Nima and Bruckner departed. As they walked, Nima laid out her plan.
I bought a potion of fear this morning in order to ensure that Chesler is in a mood to talk. I have an idea for how to get him to drink it, so you can just leave that to me. Once he has drunk the potion, though, he will likely try to run away because of the fear. This is where I will need your help. You must grab him and hold him while I interrogate him. I have another idea of what to tell him at that point that will hopefully convince him we are still members of the Walkers. And then we must take him to captivity. It is imperative that we not let him escape. But we will tell him that we are holding him only until he is needed for his role tonight. What do you think of this?
This sounds like a good plan, and I think you should take the lead in it, and I will follow. I will wear my cloak and mask and speak as little as possible, so as to avoid making myself identifiable. I will try to restrict my role to physical intimidation and physical restraint. If all that fails, I'm always up for killing a murderous insurrectionary or two.
They headed toward the Sigismund Memorial Home. Their walk through the city was uneventful. A man followed them both for half a block as they passed through the bazaar, trying to sell them Rockule spice and powdered fire onion, boasting of his unbeatable prices. He gave up eventually, heading back to his stall, to beguile other passers-by with tales of smoked paprika just in from Gerult, or Lavon peppers from Green-Planed Esseldown, and so on and on. As they passed by the giant white obelisk that stood before King Sazarkan's fortress, they donned their cloaks, and Bruckner placed the mask over his face. Nima once again set the enchantment on the chameleon ring, retaking the soldier's form from the night before. They arrived at the tree with the long limbs. A man stood there, but it was not Chesler. "Malak has asked me to direct you inside," he said tersely as they approached before Nima could speak. She opened her mouth, about to demand that Chesler be brought to them, but thought better of it. She nodded, gesturing at Bruckner to follow. They strode across the bridge. The sentry had been expecting them. "May you walk unimpeded," he said softly as they approached, opening the door for them. "Malak is waiting for you in the East Tower," he whispered as the two spies brushed past him. Once inside, Nima and Bruckner took the eastern passageway, which led to a long corridor filled with artwork, if such it could be called. The paintings were of ghoulish landscapes glimpsed in sidereal haunts by starry-eyed wanderers who painted their madness on shrieking canvases. A spiral staircase awaited them at the end of the hall. At the top was another corridor terminating in a heavy oak door, guarded by two armed sentinels. Nima moved cautiously, looking warily for traps or any signs of danger. Bruckner followed behind with a heavier tread, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. They approached the guards, who nodded, making no move to bar their entrance. They could both hear the murmur of low voices past the door, but could not decipher any specific words. Nima raised a hand and knocked. Barely had the sound stopped its echoing before the door swung open. The interior of the room beyond was completely black. The walls and floor were either made out of, or painted with, some material that was utterly dark, reflecting back the cold purple hues of the four ensorcelled torches that burned in sconces on the wall, in vibrant tongues of leaping violet. The room was thick with evil and tangible malice. In the center of the chamber stood a small, round table. On the opposite side of the table sat the man in the black mask that Nima had met the night before. At least, she assumed it was the same man. He certainly looked the same in terms of height and build, and the mask was identical. To his right was a being of utter terror. It did not sit, nor could it be said to stand. Nima felt the bile rise in her throat, and Bruckner felt a thrum of anger at the blasphemous monstrosity arrayed before them. It was a thing composed of many parts, some human, some animal, some quite alien. Eyes blinked from under chitinous lids. Gibbering mouths wandered about its twisting torsos and writhed across its many shivering ankles. Limbs formed and lips puckered, orifices squeezed and sphincters shuddered. Much spit and foam and slavering noise came from the manifold being. Nima and Bruckner recalled the shrieking thing they had fought beneath Mount Ellesbor, the undulating, writhing, acidic monster that had filled Bruckner and Tadalak with madness and fear. This being looked to be similar in kind, though not through any generic similarity between the two. but rather in virtue of their hideous, shifting formlessness. The creature before them now was much larger, and with many eyes it watched, and malevolent were its gazes. On the other side of the table sat a very tall humanoid with broad shoulders. He wore a cloak, though not a walker's cloak. His was woven out of thousands of shimmering shards of dark cloth that flowed like liquid, shifting around his form to embrace him in shimmering cascades of night. A wide yellow grin peeked out from underneath a tall, vaulted hood, but the rest of his face was hidden in the sable plumage. The masked man looked up as Nima and Bruckner entered. "Ah, you've returned. And you've brought a guest. We have been awaiting you. Please, introduce yourselves to our honored guests, my lord." His eyes bore into Nima's. "They have been awaiting you ever so eagerly." As the man spoke, Nima noticed Chesler sitting in a far corner, shivering uncontrollably, quavering in fear at the creatures about him. Nima bowed before all assembled and said,
"You will forgive me for not introducing myself by name. In my former life, I was a well-known and celebrated soldier, but I forewent both name and profession when I began a new life in the service of Panthelon and Martonius. I am now known only to those persons who are deemed worthy and in need, and to such I am known simply as the Disciple."
She motioned at Bruckner and said,
"Oh, and this here is Ted. He's very strong, though rather dull of wits, the perfect unquestioning companion for certain of my errands."
A dozen eyes swiveled and bubbled to look at Nima.
Are we not worthy indeed?
The manifold man asked. It gestured at the word "we" to the tall, hooded, smiling creature.
"We have come from distant parts to be here in this hour of need. It is the first we have heard of you, Disciple. Are we so poor as to be unworthy of the inner secrets? You know the spaces in which my companion walks, and of me? I am Decludo. Hear my many tongues, and know my many thoughts. I was spawned under the Nail Star before the Saturnine shattering. My powers were once contained in many others. I have seen 100 billion sunrises through 100,000 eyes. My spawn father is here talk of many faces. He begat me, and now I am. We do not pretend to know all things, but we think it strange that you have been kept here so long, hanging on from your sheath at this late hour.
I could not be useful if I were not a well-kept secret. I hope you will see it as a sign of my devotion that I do not seek recognition for my work, but submit to the anonymity it often requires. You are indeed deemed worthy, and it is due to the faithfulness of many of your number that I have been granted permission to offer my services. Though I do ask that you mention neither my presence nor existence to any person for whom it is not absolutely necessary information."
Nima recalled an ancient legend as she spoke, a story of some terrible wind that carried spores from some hellish landscapes far beyond the sunlit fields. These wandering seeds made their way through the froth of the firmament and somehow descended, like scattered points of light, upon unsuspecting flesh from the plains of men. These spores would unite and reanimate the pieces of the dead, forming a new creature, a monstrosity of the dark that the ancient poet Veremi had called in an ashen phrase, beings of borrowed flesh. The creature blinked with many eyes at the man Nima pretended to be, then slowly nodded with several disjointed heads. Bruckner made a grunt of acknowledgement and slight bow at the monstrosity's recognition. He too recalled hearing tales of such creatures, monstrosities stitched together from other parts. To think that he could see one here, living above ground amongst civilized folks, turned his stomach in upon itself.